Welcome to the West Block from Ottawa. I'm Eric Sorensen in for Tom Clark. On today's show, weeks of idle no more protests finally pressured the Prime Minister to call a meeting with Native leaders. Will that bring calm just 3 days before a planned escalation of protests across the country? We'll hear from two chiefs and the latest from the federal government. And then, is Ottawa falling down on its commitment to cities? Two mayors will weigh in. First, protests and hunger strikes have dominated the news for weeks, coming to a head on Friday with demonstrations on Parliament Hill led by some Aboriginal leaders, even as other leaders were meeting with the Prime Minister. Why do these issues matter, and why is it so difficult to find lasting solutions? For a bit of context, here's your weekly West Block Primer. First Nations, as the name suggests, were here first. That is the foundation of their negotiations for land, rights, and justice. Non-Aboriginals are here in greater numbers. That has given them more political power in negotiations. The Constitution in 1982 affirmed inherent Aboriginal treaty rights. But in 1996, the Royal Commission slammed the Canadian government's record, saying its policy direction over the last 150 years has been wrong. Why is this all such a big deal in Canada now? First, there are 1.2 million Aboriginal people, almost 4% of Canada's population. That's the second highest per capita Aboriginal population in the industrialized world. So, the issue is large in this country. The Aboriginal unemployment rate is almost 3 times the national average. By every important social measure, poverty, health, education, housing, Aboriginal life is unacceptably low. So the problems are real in this country. The Aboriginal population is young and growing 6 times faster than the rest of Canada. The median age for non-Aboriginals is 40. For Aboriginal people, it's 27. In short, Aboriginal people are here to stay in this country. It's becoming clear they're here, they're young, they're restless, and they're not going anywhere. The message to the rest of Canada is not get used to it, but deal with it. Well, dealing with it is exactly what some First Nations chiefs tried to do on Friday. While some chiefs joined the Prime Minister for a working meeting, others from Manitoba and Ontario boycotted it, demanding that the Governor-General be at the table. The GG did host chiefs at his residence Friday night, but Chief Theresa Spence, who has been at the center of this, says that's not good enough. So she is continuing with her liquids-only hunger protest. Chiefs like Matthew Cooncombe of Quebec did attend the meeting with the Prime Minister and would like to see a less emphasis on hunger strikes and more emphasis on dialogue that can lead to results. And joining us now, Matthew Cooncombe, the Grand Chief of the Northern Quebec and James Bay Cree. Chief, it is great to have you here because you have been on the front lines from national stage to the street protests all through your life, so it's important, I think, that we get your perspective. You were in there with the Prime Minister. This is a very long meeting. Did you have a sense that he was changing? Have we seen something different?
I believe that a goalpost has been moved. If we want to resolve and produce results and major changes, we need to fix the impasse. And the Prime Minister said there will be a high-level dialogue, and there will be an oversight by the Prime Minister's office and the Privy Council. So we have the Prime Minister there, and I think it's an opportunity. I think the onus is now on the leadership to be able to make very clear as to what the impasses is and make recommendations and seek solutions, and so that we can all move forward.
We're not used to seeing the Prime Minister blink. He held the meeting. He stayed at the meeting. Mm-hmm. They're coming forward with offers of things that can be done immediately. Do you have a sense on that what the best thing was that came out of the meeting?
The best thing that I believe that came out of the meeting is that there's still a door open. There is still an opportunity. If we are to see the protest stop, we have to see results. We have to see a change. We have to see a shift in the government, where the government's tackle and willing to address those issues that we are concerned about, whether it be treaties, specific land claims, resource revenue, and he's willing to entertain those and look at them. So there's an opportunity that is there, and I think the only way to move forward is to be able to have a face-to-face meeting with the Prime Minister, put our demands on the table. This is our solutions, and now let's talk.
You were at the meeting. Other AFN chiefs decided not to be there. What do you say to them in the wake of having been there and achieved something?
Well, I have been in protests. I have filed major court cases. I've been involved in the international community. I never went on a hunger strike. But at the end of the day, we all have to talk. The relationship is broken, and we need to fix it. And we need to produce results so that those protests will stop, and we need to find a way of how we can build and maintain and fix that Crown-federal relationship and hopefully save a life along the way.
At the end of the day, it seemed to come down to the Governor General not being in the room. Why was that not a deal breaker for you?
Well, personally, I think there's a misunderstanding on the role of the Governor General. The Constitution of this country was patriated, and the executive powers were given to the Prime Minister, and the Prime Minister will not transfers the executive powers to the Governor General. So it's just a symbolic.
Do you support the hunger strike, or do you think that she should stop that now?
Each person must decide what they think they need to do to raise the issues. I think she should stop her hunger strike because she already had met with the Governor General. There's already a meeting with the Prime Minister. She may or may not have participated, but that is fine. That is what she wanted.
She should declare victory.
I think she has I think she may have lost an opportunity to declare victory.
There is some kind of movement happening, though, outside the table around which even the Prime Minister meets, the Idle No More protests. We're hearing this week that that could be ramped up and there could be blockades. Where do you come down on the type of protests? Because you protested in the past. What's appropriate, what's not?
I've always said that there is a social time bomb of frustration, anger, and hopelessness. And there will be a social unrest when you do not have a meaningful and an effective process where there's concrete results. If there's results, there will be no protest. Now, people have the right in this country to be able to express their feelings and demonstrate if they want to. But I think it's not right to be able to try to block and try to affect the economy. I think there's other ways to do it. I have no problem with protesters. I think we should do both. I think people should be do peaceful protests. Same time, people should be on the inside talking to the Prime Minister.
Matthew Cooncombe, thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And joining us now, Regional Chief from Saskatchewan, Perry Bellegarde, who was not at the meeting with the Prime Minister. So, what did you gain by not being there?
Well, not being there, like we said in our caucus, that it's more important to meet with the Queen's representative first and the Crown's representative, because we have a nation-to-nation relationship with the Crown.
So was that, Matthew Cooncombe, Chief Atleo, they say that good came from this meeting. Do you agree?
Anything that you can bring about transformative change and build upon a relationship, we say it's positive. But we really got to make it work, transformational change. Because every time we meet with Minister of Indian Affairs, and our government, they say, we have no mandate to implement treaty. We have no mandate to give legal effect to Section 35 and enforce that. And so if we have a process, and that was the process and mandate or commitment we wanted to seek from the Prime Minister at the highest level, involvement from the Prime Minister's office, Privy Council office, to look at enforcement and implementation of treaty inherent rights. Now, let's work on that. Let's get that started.
Let me ask you about the rift that we see within the Assembly of First Nations. Chief Atleo and others were inside, you were on the outside. You are a potential linchpin at this moment for either bringing this back together or entrenching that split. Do you support Chief Atleo?
Of course. We cannot be divided. We cannot spread our energies across Canada and be worried about that divisiveness, because to me there is none. We're collectively in this together, and united we've got to stand.
There are protests coming up this week. Do you support the protests? Do you support protests that might blockade roads, railways?
We always support anything that will bring about positive, transformative change. We support processes that move things forward and educate the public that things have to change because we're tired of poverty. When I don't call them blockades. I'll always call things unifying rallies. And education, awareness leads to understanding, leads to action. And so what you're seeing when you see this talk about destabilizing the economy, it's the frustration level that's there, that's been building for many, many years because we've been marginalized from economic development. And our people are tired of the lands and resources being exploited with nothing coming back to our people because poverty is the issue. Like, our people are frustrated. When in a country as rich as Canada, in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People and the United Nations Human Development Index, Canada is rated 6th. For Indigenous peoples, we're 63rd.
Yes.
And that's not acceptable. And so when you see a movement like that, It's about bringing positive, constructive change.
And if a blockade becomes a part of that to achieve something better, then so be it.
We always say we do things in a respectful way, in a peaceful way, you know. And we say it should not have to take those blockades to raise people's eyes, to raise people's awareness. It should not have to come to that, you know. And so we always say there's three strategies that have to collectively be done: the legal fight and the legal strategy, you know, against the government bills that are unilaterally imposed. The political strategy, which we have now with the Prime Minister's commitment and Cabinet's commitment, and as well political activism. All three things have to be done collectively so that we can work in unison and bring about change in all fronts.
All right. Perry Bellegarde, thank you for talking to us today.
You're very welcome, Eric.
Coming up next, what are the government's next steps in its relations with First Nations? Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Greg Rickford, will join us. Welcome back. Coming out of Friday's meeting with the Prime Minister, some chiefs say it was successful, others aren't so sure. Today, the government is announcing how it'll spend the $330 million promised in last year's budget for water and wastewater management on reserves. It's not part of the demands made by Aboriginal leaders on Friday, but it does appear to be a gesture of good faith. And joining us now is the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, Greg Rickford.
Good morning.
Fair to say, Mr. Rickford, that the timing of this is meant to be as a sincere gesture, but that it needs to go further, that there's a need for more money. And do all of these protests help you in your department get more out of the government now?
Well, let me try and unpack that question. First of all, with respect to water and wastewater treatment, this was part of Canada's Economic Action Plan version 2012. We had obviously engaged in a thoroughly consultative process with the Assembly of First Nations, coast to coast to coast, meeting with technical experts, community members, and the department on matters of the kind of infrastructure that would be required, the kind of capacity and the kind of legislation. What we came up with briefly was capacity, the ability to report, monitor and maintain facilities, an ongoing need for infrastructure, and a piece of legislation that the federal government and First Nations communities could adhere to so that they would have the same water quality standards as other Canadians have come to expect.
And if that's a sincere first step, what next? Because there are very big issues here. Does it need more money, in your view? And do these protests give you the opportunity to say, look what's happening to other departments, we do need something more?
Eric, it's not just a question of resources. We understand that there are structural challenges out there that we need to move through some kind of process. If Friday's meeting means a couple of important things, it's a dialogue around land claims and treaties, the ability to have more political oversight in these regards, and move them forward towards certainty, finality, and a positive impact on the key part of this, exactly what First Nation Canadians are asking for as other Canadians, jobs and sustainable communities. And we're putting the focus on that. And I think Friday we made some significant progress in those regards. Even chiefs who had said, may have been guardedly optimistic at best and may not have been at the meetings have had positive comments about where this could go.
One of the big areas where they're worried that they're not making enough progress are on these omnibus bills where it involves land or water management. They want change. Doesn't seem like the government is ready to make any changes, any tweaks. Is there any common ground to be found there?
Respectfully, we just don't take that position. The land designation piece that you're referring to in Bill C-45, the Budget Implementation Act, actually deals with a simplification of the process for leasing land, which provides First Nations with a new tool or a simpler tool for leasing land for commercial and industrial development, whether that's a large-scale resource project or big box stores on their reserve where they're bordering a city or town or small business center. That's what facilitates economic growth in those communities.
So they will need to perhaps take this through the courts to see if there is anything in the way of traditional Aboriginal rights that would allow them more say.
I'm not going to comment on the potential for litigation. I can tell you that those specific clauses were in direct response to First Nations communities who asked us to simplify a process that was painfully long and didn't act at what they'd asked for, and that was the ability to act at the speed of business, and that's what that accomplishes.
Why do you think this all boiled over in this past week as it did?
Well, I think what has happened here is you have the Assembly of First Nations and their leaders wanting to continue to build on a process that we started with the Crown First Nations gathering. We've seen the Idle No More movement express how, to a certain extent, that the federal government feels we know that Aboriginal Canadians represent the most important part of the human resource piece of any resource development. We'd love numbers to improve on reserve with respect to employment and unemployment. To the extent that there's dissatisfaction, legitimate grievances, to the extent that there's dissatisfaction with that, we share it. What we need to focus on are the tools and the policy platforms or the oversight committees, whatever we're talking about, but things that actually accomplish goals and deliver. So to that extent, I think that there's a good legacy here when we can replace placards with college diplomas, high school diplomas, and tools to work in trades.
I only have 15 seconds. You sat in with the Prime Minister for 4 hours.
Yeah.
You've been working on this file for a long time.
Yeah.
Do you see a watershed change here? Is he genuinely ready to move forward with a little more speed, let's say?
Well, I think in fairness, both the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and under our Prime Minister's leadership have shown that particularly in the past year we've made major developments and we're building on those. This just simply suggests that the political machinery to oversee the progress will be more substantial. And that's what we accomplished. That's what they asked for.
Greg Rickford, thanks very much for being here.
I appreciate this. Thank you.
Coming up on the West Block, the Conservatives are drawing up their 2013 budget. What are cities asking for? Two of Canada's big city mayors join us next. Welcome back. Crumbling infrastructure is a problem in cities right across the country. Here you can see some damage from the collapse of the Ville-Marie Tunnel in Montreal just over a year ago. The cost of replacing Canada's deteriorating infrastructure will be significant. Does Ottawa need to pony up more money? Two of Canada's big city mayors say yes if Canada wants to remain competitive on the global stage. And joining us now from Vancouver, the Mayor of Vancouver, Gregor Robertson, and here in studio, the Mayor of Ottawa, Jim Watson. Mayor Robertson, first of all, half a century ago, there were great government investment infrastructure programs for highways and sewers. Jump ahead 50 years. How bad is it now?
We have a lot of challenges with infrastructure right across the country, aging and not being kept up. And cities continue to make significant investments, about $12 billion a year. The federal government cut infrastructure spending decades ago. It has not come back up to adequate levels. So it's catch-up time, basically. We need a 20-year plan going forward in this next federal budget, a commitment to additional federal dollars to match the increased investment we want to make in our cities.
So you want, I hear, $2.5 billion. Are you close to getting it, or a part of it, or none of it?
Well, we are in back and forth dialogue with the federal government, really looking at this next federal budget as a critical time to see that additional $2.5 billion so that we can address transit needs, roads and bridges, water pipes, sewers, all that infrastructure that frankly has to keep up for Canada to be competitive globally.
So, Mayor Watson, when we talk about sewers and roads, et cetera, is it about just the economy part of it, or is it part of a health and safety issue, too?
Well, Eric, it's about both, because it is about quality of life. We had a sinkhole in the east end of our city that was disruptive to the economy, disruptive to commuters and people who live in the east end of our city. But it's also in the nation's best interest and self-interest, because cities are the economic engines of the country. And if they're slowed down because of traffic gridlock or unsafe bridges or water pipes that are bursting, then the economy suffer of the whole country. So we've been doing our part. We've had discussions with the federal government. They've been good partners in the past with their infrastructure programs, going back to Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien and now Prime Minister Harper. But we need their help on a go-forward basis, and we need sustainable, predictable funding. So it's not just one-off, so that we get going, get the job done, and then we run out of money.
Mayor Robertson, municipalities do have the capacity to raise money with property taxes. Governments that are kind of squeezed above you at the provincial, federal level may be pointing to that.
Well, property taxes represent only about 8% of the overall tax revenue. So we see about half of our tax dollars going from cities like Ottawa and Vancouver to the federal government. What we need to see for big spending on infrastructure, we're talking, we have a need to spend upwards of $15 billion on transit infrastructure over the next 30 years. We need big chunks coming back from the income tax, the sales tax that we pay to the federal government and the provincial government coming back. The property tax can't bear all that burden on its own.
If this, Mayor Watson, stimulates the economy, but how do you also address the fact that you might be looking at deeper deficits during this period?
Well, it's a matter of priorities. You know, at the municipal level, for instance, we're not by law allowed to run a deficit, but we can invest in capital projects and debenture those. And they're long-term investments. They have a payback in terms of increasing our economic opportunities, speeding up the process of goods and services going across the country. And at the end of the day, it creates a lot of jobs. And we know for a fact that infrastructure is a priority of citizens. We see it and hear from our constituents all the time in terms of the amount of time they're spending in gridlock, the number of pipe failures that we see in older cities. You know, you look at what's coming up in the next couple of years, the 150th anniversary of Confederation. Remember back in 1967, there was Centennial Pools, Centennial Community Centers. We've got to revitalize our basic infrastructure. This is not sexy stuff, but it has to get done.
Ontario is struggling right now. Used to be the have province, used to help out other provinces. In this formula, should Ottawa and Ontario maybe get a little more than, say, a booming community like Vancouver?
No, I think it should be fair. I think, you know, it should be based on a per capita formula by and large, simply because the larger cities do have larger problems. I'm not dismissing the needs of smaller communities, but a lot of the smaller communities feed off the larger communities, bedroom communities where the people work in the downtown core. And if you have a healthy downtown core, you have healthy suburbs. And we don't want to go the way of some American cities where you have the donut effect, where it's an empty core and thriving suburbs. It's on our best interest to make sure all parts of the community are well served with good basic infrastructure.
Mayor Robertson, last word to you on what happens next.
Well, we obviously look forward to seeing a federal budget that includes that $2.5 billion of additional commitment coming to us so that we can put our dollars better to work. Because really all this is about creating jobs locally in our communities to get our cities up to par and increase productivity. We're losing $10 billion a year in productivity due to traffic congestion. So we need to be investing in transit and bridges and roads to make sure that our economy is strong and we remain competitive.
All right, Mayor Robertson in Vancouver, Mayor Watson here in Ottawa. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, MPs are still away on winter break, but Ottawa will be as busy as ever. Idle No More protesters are promising another day of action across the country on Wednesday. And in the weeks ahead, National Chief Sean Atleo will have another meeting with the Prime Minister. And that's our show for this week. Remember to check out our website, thewestblock.ca, for all the latest news. And get in touch. We read all your comments, whether it's on Twitter, Facebook, or email. And Tom Clark will be back with you next week. I'm Eric Sorensen. Thanks for watching.